Sheila left Mr. Bailey's room with a heavy heart. She knew what she had done was wrong, but she wouldn't have taken this step if she hadn't been suspicious. She had to find out what was going on. It might even be a matter of life and death. In her early childhood, Sheila lived with her mother in a small apartment in an old 2-story building. She had no father or other relatives, just her and her mum Gina. The woman grew up in an orphanage, got a social dwelling from the state after graduation, studied to be a seamstress, and worked most of her life at the local weaving factory. The industrial zone where the factory was located was close to their house. They didn't need to spend money on bus fare, which was helpful because Sheila and her mother lived very modestly. However, Sheila remembered her early childhood as the happiest time of her life. Her mother was young and cheerful. When she smiled, all of Sheila's worries disappeared. Gina worked hard, sometimes even night shifts at the factory. That's why, by age 5, Sheila could take care of herself. She could make soup, clean up, and go to the store if needed. Most of Sheila's friends lived the same way. Parents worked and the kids were on their own. It was a happy time when Sheila's mum finally came home, often with something delicious. They would sit in the kitchen, drink tea and share the day's news. It was great. Sheila thought her mother was beautiful, fair-skinned, russet-haired, statuesque. She wished she looked like her, but she was small, swarthy and brown-eyed, not as striking as her mother. Sheila was proud of her, but this beauty eventually caused Gina's misfortune. Angelo started to court Gina with compliments, flowers and dates at the movies and cafes. Sometimes they took Sheila with them. Angelo seemed cheerful, good and caring. At first Sheila liked him, and sometimes they'd talk about Angelo. Sheila was 11 then, and understood a lot, so her mother sought her advice, almost as an equal. "Daughter, he's hinting at marriage. Do you think it's worth it?" At that moment, Sheila was sure it was worth it. Angelo could take care of them and be a support and protection. Sheila missed having a father and envied her friends who had dads. Angelo worked as a driver at the factory where Gina worked. He was good-looking, tough, and funny. He was the life and soul of the party, with many friends and acquaintances. Angelo lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, in a better neighbourhood than theirs. Anyway, the wedding soon took place, and after the wedding, it was decided to move into Angelo's apartment. "There's a better school and additional lessons nearby," listed Gina. "Our apartment is old and needs repairs. Angelo's is spacious, bright and beautiful." That's how Sheila and her mum ended up in Angelo's apartment. The man had remodelled his living room, cutting off a small part of it so that Sheila would have some semblance of privacy, and had even bought some furniture for the girl. Sheila was happy to have her own bedroom, even if it was part of the living room. Then the man offered Gina to sell her tiny apartment. The woman resisted at first, afraid of being left without a home, but Angelo convincingly described the advantages of a spacious 3-bedroom apartment and the plans for a second child. Indeed, how could 4 people live in a 1-bedroom? Eventually, Gina agreed, sold her apartment, and gave all the money to Angelo, who also put his 1-bedroom up for sale. Soon the family moved into a spacious 3-room apartment, and Sheila had a real bedroom, which delighted her. At first the girl was happy with the changes. Angelo improved their lives, brighter and fuller. They lived in a good apartment, often had guests, and it was fun and joyful. Sheila went to a new school and quickly made friends. The first couple of years were almost perfect. Almost, because Angelo had a fiery temper and often quarrelled with her mother over insignificant reasons. Angelo was jealous and irritated by what he called her mismanagement. It was hard for Sheila to hear reproaches to her mother, but Gina assured her that everything was fine. Angelo loved them, and a family quarrel was normal. Then Angelo started drinking. He had always drunk on weekends with his friends, and Gina seemed to enjoy the parties. But then Angelo began drinking in the evenings after work, sometimes with friends or alone. Gina started to worry because Angelo had to drive in the morning. Angelo was always annoyed by her concerns, and sometimes he said hurtful things. "I took you with a child, put both of you in good conditions. I support you because your salary is just pennies. And you're giving me a hard time? Get out of my sight." Angelo said this loudly and rudely. If Gina argued, it turned into a real scandal, and Sheila locked herself in her room and covered her ears. She was scared, upset and hurt for her mother. Over the years, Angelo drank more, lost his job, and now the family was supported only by Gina. But Angelo still considered himself a benefactor who sheltered a woman with a child. His complaints increased. Gina couldn't cook, the apartment was dirty, she didn't care for him, and most painfully, she didn't give him a son. "You're not capable of anything, not even having a second child," he lamented. "If I had my son, there would be something to live for and develop." Angelo also started nagging Sheila. Her clothes were inappropriate. She studied poorly. She had the wrong friends and didn't help much at home. Once, Sheila was glad Angelo would be her stepfather. She hoped for friendship, support and a warm relationship, but he never accepted her. Sheila irritated him, and he often reprimanded his wife for spoiling her daughter and spending too much money on her. He seemed to hate them. When drunk, he hurled a stream of insults at them, making them feel worthless and miserable, with unearned reproaches and hurtful name-calling. At night, Angelo kept his wife and daughter awake by talking loudly on the phone and turning the TV on full blast. Sheila had school in the morning, and her mother had to go to work. But Angelo hadn't worked in a long time. No employer wanted an irresponsible drunkard. He could sleep until lunchtime, unconcerned about the problems of those close to him. Sheila often asked her mother to divorce Angelo, but it seemed she still loved him. Besides, where could they go? They didn't have another place to stay, and Angelo was the sole owner of their 2-bedroom apartment. He often reminded them of this during his drunken rants. "You're nobody here. Nobody, you understand? So don't show off. If you get on my nerves, I'll kick you out." Sheila lived in constant fear. She was afraid they would be thrown out on the street, or that Angelo would start a fire while everyone was asleep. His friends, who became more marginal and unpleasant over the years, also scared her. Who else would socialize with an unemployed drunkard? But Sheila was most worried about her mother, whose health was deteriorating. She often had headaches and high blood pressure. The doctors recommended a calm lifestyle with no stress, but Angelo's behavior made her life unbearable. The lack of money and the need to work multiple shifts added to her stress. Sometimes her mother felt so bad that she lay on the sofa, clutching her temples and quietly crying. The doctors advised inpatient treatment, but her mother feared their home would turn into a den in her absence, and she couldn't leave Sheila alone. Sheila graduated from school and entered nursing school. She knew that hard studying was her only path to a free, independent life. She devoted all her time to her studies and managed to get into medical school. After completing her studies, Sheila got a job at a private clinic that paid well. She began saving for future housing, hoping to take out a mortgage in a few years. Her plans were grandiose, and life seemed pleasant and well planned. But everything was shattered by a tragedy. Sheila's mum went to work that morning, kissed her daughter as usual and wished her a good day. Sheila responded in the same way. In the living room, a drunken Angelo snored on the floor. Sheila spoke to her mother in a half-whisper, not wanting to wake him, and hoping she could sneak off to work before he woke up. At lunchtime, Sheila got a phone call from one of her mum's co-workers. Sheila knew her very well. "Your mum is sick," the woman said in a worried voice. "They took her to the hospital." Sheila's heart sank. There was no talk of anything fatal, but with some inner instinct, Sheila realized she would not see her mother again. And so it came to pass. When Sheila rushed into the hospital, she was met by a nurse, and from her look, the girl realized the worst had happened. Her mother was not saved. A stroke. Everything after that was a blur. The funeral, which her mum's colleagues helped organise, and endless condolences. Angelo, who didn't stop drinking and didn't understand much. Thoughts about the future didn't particularly bother Sheila at the time. She tried to comprehend what had happened, and her brain refused to accept it. In the evening after the wake, Sheila and Angelo were alone. Some buddies came in with a bottle under the disguise of supporting a friend who had lost his wife. Angelo passed out quickly, falling asleep on the kitchen floor. The buddies continued without him. Sheila lay in her bed, holding her mother's blouse. The fabric still held her scent. Tears ran down her cheeks. One of Angelo's guests quietly came into her room and sat on the edge of the bed. Sheila looked at him in surprise. A red, flabby face, cloudy, watery eyes, and a stupid smile on his lips. "And you're a real beauty," he drawled, scrutinizing Sheila. It was a sticky, nasty look that seemed to leave marks on her skin. She wanted to wash them off immediately. Sheila asked the man to leave, but he moved closer and wrapped his thick, sweaty arms around her tightly. Sheila realized she had to run. Somehow she found the strength. She pushed the drunken man away and rushed to the exit. He chased after her, but his legs barely held him, to Sheila's luck. "Where are you going, you fool? What are you afraid of? I won't do you any harm. Quite the contrary." Sheila ran into the street in her morning suit. Thankfully, she hadn't changed into pyjamas. She didn't have the strength for it that terrible evening. As she left the apartment, she managed to grab her backpack from the nightstand. It had some cash, money, and documents. Sheila called her friend Melanie and explained the situation. "Come to my place. You'll spend the night here," confidently declared the girl. Sheila exhaled with relief. At least she had somewhere to go and could figure out what to do next. At Melanie's place, Sheila calmed down a little, came to her senses, and realized she wouldn't return to that apartment again. No, she would go one more time to get her things, and that was it. She wouldn't do it now, but later, when the fear had subsided. Living with Angelo was impossible. He was drinking, becoming more aggressive and weird, and had horrible buddies. It just wasn't safe to be there. Sheila had some savings, money she had collected for a down payment on a mortgage. She used it to rent an apartment. Melanie helped her find suitable housing. Then life somehow got better. Work, a rented apartment, girlfriends and weekends at the movies or cafes. Sheila even liked her new life. No more shuddering at night because her stepfather brought someone over. No more listening to his insults or seeing his twisted, hateful face. He, by the way, reacted quite calmly to Sheila moving out. "It's about time," he commented, watching his stepdaughter hurriedly pack her things. "You've grown up now. You're not a little girl. You won't be lost. Just don't forget who raised you and taught you. Help me, visit me, and give me extra money sometimes. You owe me." Naturally, Sheila did not visit Angelo, and certainly did not help him financially. He had made her, and her mother's life, a living hell. He lived off his wife's money, whom he had driven to a stroke. Sheila wanted nothing to do with him. She wished she could forget he existed. But how? Especially since Sheila longed for her mother. In her rented apartment, she wondered why they both hadn't moved out earlier. She had the money for rent. Perhaps her mother would still be alive, because Angelo's behaviour had been a constant stressor. That's probably what caused the stroke. Unfortunately, we can't change the past. The private clinic where Sheila worked as a nurse gradually grew into a full medical centre. Luxurious renovations, stylish interiors, the best medical equipment, and renowned doctors. The business owner wasn't a medical professional but did a lot for his enterprise. The staff's salary was excellent by city standards. Sheila had enough for rent, good food, and even some nice, but not too expensive, clothes. Then something happened. Sheila didn't understand what it was. The previous owner either went bankrupt or got into debt. Either way, he had to sell the medical centre. A new owner took over, and there were disturbing rumours among the staff. "A new broom always sweeps differently," the senior nurse said meaningfully. "What if they ask us all to leave?" "Oh, I'm so frightened," Sheila worried. "Well, you, young and beautiful, have nothing to worry about. But I, almost a pensioner, will definitely be fired. Who needs elderly workers anyway?" Sheila hoped the senior nurse was right, and that she wouldn't be affected, because Sheila couldn't afford to lose her job. She had no one, and had to rely only on herself. Unfortunately, the prediction came true, but not exactly. The new owner did start firing former employees, and Sheila was also laid off, despite being young, beautiful, and a good worker. It was a blow for Sheila and unexpected. She had really hoped to keep her job. The young woman began monitoring job ads. None of the available jobs satisfied her. The average salary for a nurse in their city was low. Only private clinics paid well, and working in a public hospital would only cover rent and food for a month, even with Sheila's modest needs. She was close to despair. The rent was due and she had no money. The landlord gave her a couple of weeks, just a couple of weeks, and she'd be on the street. Melanie, the same friend who had taken Sheila in a few years ago, helped her again. "Why are you so hung up on being a nurse?" "What else can I do?" Sheila waved her hands. "There are plenty of other jobs for people with your education." "Like what?" "Well, for example, here." Melanie took a folded newspaper from her purse. It had been a long time since Sheila had seen a real newspaper. This edition consisted entirely of job ads. "What's this?" "I've been looking at job openings in my spare time," Melanie explained. "I even highlighted an ad you should pay attention to. Study it carefully. I think you'll find something." Sheila took the newspaper and read the circled ads. They were all vacancies for caregivers. A medical degree was encouraged. Sheila smiled. How had she not realized this herself? The next day, she started calling potential employers. Some had already found a caregiver, some offered too low a payment, and some needed a male assistant because the patient had to be carried to the bathroom. Sheila almost despaired, but finally found a suitable option. She was invited to an interview. A couple of hours after the reassuring call, Sheila stood in front of a luxurious mansion. A wealthy family obviously lived here. Sheila even hesitated. Would such a family hire her, a simple girl? A woman in a strict blue dress with an impenetrable face met her and escorted her inside. Sheila felt dizzy. Such spaciousness, such luxury. She had only seen such interiors in TV shows about the rich. "Have a seat," said the woman in the blue dress, and Sheila meekly sat on the soft sofa. Soon a man in his 50s came down the wide staircase. He greeted Sheila and sat across from her. His grey, attentive eyes examined her. "You're so young," he said. "Can you manage?" "I have experience with difficult patients. I worked as a nurse in a hospital for several years, and—" The conversation continued in a businesslike manner. The man with grey eyes was interested in Sheila's education, experience and skills. She answered honestly and directly, and she could tell from his expression that he was satisfied with her responses. "Well, from the looks of it, you seem to be a good fit for us. Do you have any questions?" Of course, Sheila had questions. She already knew her potential salary, which she had been informed of over the phone, and she was more than satisfied with the amount, because the salary offered was even more than what she earned at the hospital. However, Sheila was genuinely interested in learning about her ward. "Mr. Bailey hardly ever gets out of bed," the man began. "He has a serious diagnosis, and nothing can be done, even with his connections and money. He is slowly fading away, losing strength. He needs someone to help him during the day, to give him medicine, adjust his pillows, listen to him, and entertain him with a story. I see that you are an open, kind person, and that's what we need. Your medical degree is perfect because Mr. Bailey sometimes needs injections. Can you manage?" "Of course," Sheila replied immediately. Then the man with grey, attentive eyes took her to meet her employer. Mr. Bailey was lying in a spacious, bright bedroom. There was a slight odour of medicines, but overall the air was fresh and cool. Usually, in the wards of seriously ill people, there is a heavy, repulsive odour, but here it was different. Sheila liked it very much. Mr. Bailey was a thin, pale man, with dark, short-cropped hair, and brown, almost black, intelligent eyes. "Here, Mr. Bailey, I found you a day nurse." "My name is Sheila. How do you do?" said Sheila. Mr. Bailey looked at her with a warm, friendly expression and even managed to smile. "Nice to meet you. Thank you, I'm fine, and I'll try to give you as little trouble as possible." Sheila was surprised. She had expected to help a capricious man who would demand the impossible and berate her at every turn. She was ready to tolerate it for the sake of money, as she had no other option. But these kind words took her aback. Perhaps Mr. Bailey would show his true colours later. However, Mr. Bailey turned out to be a pleasant, tactful, intelligent and respectful man. With the household helpers, of whom there were many, he was impeccably polite and did not offend anyone regarding their salary. These people responded in kind. They loved and respected him. Mr. Bailey was also aware of his subordinates' problems. For instance, he helped obtain expensive medicine for the maid's son. He also arranged a hospital stay for the gardener's mother, paid for the cook's daughter's camp trip, and found a clinic for the manager's son. The very man with grey eyes who had met Sheila on her first day. The boy suffered from addiction and was literally dying. Mr. Bailey gave him a chance for a happy life. He had money and connections, and used them to make others happy. Sheila and Mr. Bailey became fast friends. After learning the young nurse's story, he respected her greatly. "You are a strong girl," he said. "Another person in your place might have broken down. Many start drinking, going out, living recklessly. But you stood firm. You have a strong core." Sheila was pleased with this praise. They spent a lot of time together. Mr. Bailey rarely got up and often needed help. His sociable nature did not tolerate loneliness. Despite his illness, he still enjoyed conversations and preferred being around people. He constantly had visitors, former colleagues, friends and relatives. The servants were always around as well. Sheila, too, became friends with the kind and friendly Mr. Bailey. From the doctor who visited almost daily, Sheila learned about his diagnosis. It left no chance for recovery, which felt hurtful and unfair. Such a good man, not even that old, exuded warmth and kindness. Everyone around him felt good, calm and pleasant, yet his fate was so harsh. Sheila talked a lot with Mr. Bailey, and the household helpers also shared stories about him, always speaking highly of him. Mr. Bailey came from a poor village family. From childhood he showed talent in various sciences, so after graduating from village school, he moved to the city and entered a prestigious faculty where they trained aviation engineers. He studied and worked part-time in a design bureau. The idea of creating his own manufacturing company came to him just then. After graduating from university, he got a job at a factory, but never forgot his dream. He saved money, made connections, and gathered information. Finally, the happy moment arrived. Mr. Bailey found a company that did special devices for small airplanes used in agriculture. Initially it was tough. He steadily went into debt, with savings rapidly depleting. He had almost decided that it wouldn't work out when luck struck. The newly founded company received its first large order, which the staff completed excellently, and everything took off from there. An important customer gave them good publicity in the right circles, leading to a flood of orders. The firm grew, strengthened and developed, soon becoming a full-fledged large company with corresponding profits. Mr. Bailey was dating a girl he had been fond of since university days, Danielle. They met once at a student party. Mr. Bailey immediately realized he was in love, but Danielle had doubts. She was beautiful, with thick, long, honey-coloured hair, big blue eyes and a gorgeous figure. Many guys were interested in her back then, and such a rich choice was confusing. Danielle liked Mr. Bailey. He was kind, reliable and genuine. However, she wanted a beautiful life and thought her looks deserved it. But Mr. Bailey was not rich at that time. However, when his business started doing well, fate brought them together again. Both decided their meeting was not accidental, and they became a couple. Mr. Bailey felt truly happy. He had money, a favourite business, and Danielle by his side. She was gentle, loving, and understanding. By that time, she could appreciate Mr. Bailey's qualities, having learned from past mistakes. Soon, Mr. Bailey could afford a huge house in an elite neighbourhood. They assumed they would have children soon, and there would be enough room for more than one baby. Mr. Bailey and Danielle dreamed of having many children. However, these plans did not come true. Year after year passed, and the long-awaited child never appeared. One day, Danielle told someone she ended her pregnancy years ago. She blamed herself and even suggested Mr. Bailey leave her for a normal wife, without such a past. Of course, he didn't want to think about that. They began many years of visiting doctors, but nothing helped. Expensive injections and innovative techniques were all in vain. Luckily, for Mr. Bailey, he had his own business, and the work took a lot of his time and required full commitment, so he had something to do. But Danielle turned from a cheerful and gentle wife into a suffering person, blaming everyone and everything for her unhappiness or lack of empathy. She was fixated on unattainable motherhood, couldn't find peace, and was angry at Mr. Bailey for spending so much time on work and not suffering enough with her. Mr. Bailey suggested his wife join a volunteer organisation, since she wanted a child so much. These people visited orphanages and helped orphans. He even sponsored a couple of orphanages, hoping Danielle would visit them and find out what they needed. Initially, Danielle seemed enthusiastic, but it didn't last long. The children, often ill-mannered, noisy or even sick, repelled her. She didn't want to see them, so she quickly withdrew and immersed herself in her own suffering again. Mr. Bailey continued to help orphanages on his own. He liked seeing the gratitude of the staff and feeling that he was making the orphans a little happier. After all, that's why we are given the strength and opportunity to support those who are weaker. Danielle and Mr. Bailey became very distant. They didn't understand each other and often quarrelled. Danielle accused Mr. Bailey of being inattentive and stiff, although these were unfair reproaches. Mr. Bailey missed the former Danielle, their heart-to-heart talks, and the warmth and tenderness that had once been between them. Then she appeared in his life, a young woman modest, quiet, incredibly beautiful and touching, and very sincere. That's what finally captivated Mr. Bailey. He rarely met such people. Gina worked in a factory that made overalls for his company. One day Mr. Bailey went to the factory director on business and accidentally ran into her in the corridor. It was like a lightning strike. At first glance, Gina didn't seem special. Minimal makeup and a modest dress that hid the advantages of her graceful figure. But Mr. Bailey couldn't tear himself away from her radiant, gentle, attractive eyes. He plucked up the courage to meet her and learned her name. They made casual conversation, and he felt warmth and sympathy from Gina. Mr. Bailey did a dishonest thing. He hid from Gina that he was married, otherwise she would never have agreed to meet him. He didn't think about the future at that moment. The truth would come out eventually, and he didn't worry about Danielle's feelings. It seemed to him that they had long been strangers. With Gina it was different. She wrapped Mr. Bailey with care, like a warm blanket. In turn, he took care of her, bought her beautiful clothes, supported her morally, and even helped get her salary raised. Gina was embarrassed by the expensive gifts, but she clearly enjoyed Mr. Bailey's care. Gina had a complicated past. Growing up in an orphanage, she didn't know the love of family and gratefully accepted Mr. Bailey's courtship. At the time, Mr. Bailey admitted he was married. They had been dating for a couple of months. Her beautiful blue eyes reflected pain and despair. She looked at Mr. Bailey as if he were a great disappointment. "My wife and I have been strangers for a long time. She doesn't understand me and I don't understand her. We will divorce," Mr. Bailey said, realizing how banal his words sounded. Typical excuses for an unfaithful husband. Gina left him, not just because he was married, but because he had deceived her for so long. Mr. Bailey didn't know where Gina lived, but he waited for her in the evenings at the factory gate, confessed his love, and begged her to return. One day, Gina asked him without emotion not to bother her any more. "I have a boyfriend and he is honest with me and unmarried. We are serious, so please do not bother me any more." Gina's gaze was cold, her voice hard. Mr. Bailey probably wouldn't have backed down from her, but then it became clear that Danielle was expecting a child. A long-awaited event, which no one had almost hoped for. Another IVF treatment at the Capital Clinic yielded this result. Danielle seemed to be flying around the house on wings. Her endless reproaches and incessant suffering were gone. Her eyes now beamed with happiness. She needed the protection and support of her spouse, and so Mr. Bailey decided to leave Gina. Especially since he had a child on the way, who would need a father? His heart ached. Some inner instinct told him he was missing something critical, something that could not be regained. Mr. Bailey longed for Gina's touch, for her eyes, but the new circumstances dictated a new line of behaviour. Mr. Bailey stayed with his family. Danielle's pregnancy was difficult, and she went to the hospital to preserve it. Both spouses were constantly anxious for their future baby. Would they be able to carry him to term? Another chance to become parents seemed unlikely. Trey was born prematurely, but was quite viable. The baby had to spend a couple of months in the hospital. But then there was a solemn discharge with many guests, animators, a huge cake, and baskets of flowers. Danielle felt truly happy. Mr. Bailey saw this and was happy for her. He was also proud of becoming a father. He had a son, a future assistant, the successor of the furniture company, and a best friend. The new role and emotions associated with it almost completely pushed thoughts of Gina out of Mr. Bailey's mind. And then there was a lot of work. Only occasionally did he dream of her beautiful blue eyes, clear and transparent like mountain lakes. And then his heart clenched with longing for her. Mr. Bailey sometimes came to the factory where Gina worked for business matters. He carefully looked around in the hope of seeing her, but she was nowhere to be found. Maybe she had resigned from her new job. But he did not try to find out specifically. It was better to forget about Gina. He had a son now. She had a boyfriend. She told him so herself. So what was the point of all this nonsense? Why am I telling you this story? Mr. Bailey looked at the hushed Sheila with a smile. You see, if you meet love, true love, never trade it for anything. Fight for it to the end. Only then in your later years will you realize that you did everything right in this life. You can always find a way to arrange everything, to ensure you don't miss your happiness and don't leave others unhappy. I guess you're young. I don't think you know what I mean. Sheila perhaps did not fully understand her wise employer, but she felt his longing for this Gina. Wow, they only met for 2 months, and he remembers her all his life. Even now, being heavily burdened, he regrets missing her then. That's the feeling. Sheila suddenly realized that she dreamed of someday loving someone just as much. Little Trey was the light in the window for the expectant parents, the wonder of wonders, the crown prince. Needless to say, the baby was spoiled, piled with expensive toys and enveloped in care. Both mother and father seemed to live for the sake of this handsome boy. Mr. Bailey had many plans for his son. He saw him as an intelligent, strong young man, grasping, but also kind and compassionate. But Trey grew up, as it often happens, not at all how his parents imagined. Spoiled, capricious, selfish. Pronouncing these epithets only about his son, Mr. Bailey shook his head. My fault. My fault. I worked a lot. Convinced myself it was for his sake and his future. I wanted to leave him an empire, to develop and strengthen, but no way. At first everything was fine. Danielle zealously took on the development of her baby, infant fable, speed reading courses for preschoolers, mental math, school preparation with college professors, and admission to the city's most prestigious school. Here, Mr. Bailey had to use his connections. Despite the efforts of tutors, Trey did not score the passing marks independently. Then, the influential father often had to use his power and importance to support his son. He didn't like it. It seemed wrong. But Danielle always convinced her husband that he had to promote their only offspring by any means. Danielle loved Trey. All mothers love their children, but in Danielle's case, it turned into something almost pathological. She forgave him everything, organized his life and leisure so he did not face difficulties and did not get upset unnecessarily. Trey was so sensitive to failures, sobbing, suffering, and having long headaches afterwards. Of course, in such conditions, the boy couldn't grow up differently. He believed the whole world revolved around him, and knew that if he complained to his mother or made a sad face, she would do whatever was necessary. Mr. Bailey didn't agree with these methods of upbringing. He tried to argue with his wife, but "You don't know how to bring up children, and I've read a lot of literature. This is how free individuals, confident and happy people grow. You have no idea how many traumas we all have from childhood. They prevent us from moving forward in life, cut off our wings. This won't happen to Trey." If Mr. Bailey continued to insist, Danielle would use iron arguments. "You're at work all the time. You don't show up at home. You're not particularly interested in the child. You don't know what he lives for, what he breathes." Here Mr. Bailey shut up, gave up because Danielle was right. He spent a lot of time at work and had no idea how to bring up children. His wife, of course, had a much better grasp of the matter. When it was time for university, it became clear that Trey's knowledge was not even enough for the minimum grade required for a fee-paying department. This was surprising, given that he attended a prestigious school. Trey's grades were always excellent, so Mr. Bailey was shocked by this outcome. He believed his son's knowledge was sufficient. Yes, Trey was immature, dependent and capricious, but he was diligent and intelligent in his studies. But it turned out that Danielle had been solving her son's academic issues by bribing the teachers, ensuring Trey received good grades. Mr. Bailey was distressed. He realized it had been a mistake to distance himself from his son's education. Meanwhile, Trey became a design student at the local college, choosing his own field. Although he aspired to study in prestigious universities, Mr. Bailey knew his unprepared son needed close parental supervision. Trey studied at the local college for a few months and then disappeared, taking a substantial amount of money from the safe. Danielle was distraught, constantly taking sedatives. Surprisingly, Mr. Bailey felt a sense of relief. At last, his son had made a decisive and courageous move. He assumed Trey had gone to the capital to pursue his dreams and try to make his own way. Even if he failed, the attempt itself was worthwhile. Later, it was confirmed that Trey had indeed gone to the capital. He neither studied nor worked there. He squandered his father's money, surfing the internet, searching for design courses, starting and abandoning them as soon as they became boring or difficult. When the money ran out, Trey called, asking for a transfer. Danielle, of course, complied with his request, willing to do anything to keep his favour. Mr. Bailey, had he been consulted, would have acted differently. He wouldn't have given money to his audacious son, forcing him to either return home or earn his own way. But arguing with Danielle about Trey was futile. What if he starves without money? What if he turns to crime to get money and ends up in trouble? How could we live with that, knowing it was our fault for not helping our little one in a difficult moment? Trey stayed in the capital, fully supported by his father. He called his parents only when he needed money, speaking about his life briefly and reluctantly, as if these conversations were a burden. Trey tried various fields. He worked as a photo model, played in a rock band, attempted to start a business with his father's money, and dabbled in psychology, but he never succeeded. Mr. Bailey understood why. Trey wasn't used to working hard. He grew up in comfortable conditions, unfamiliar with facing difficulties. He preferred an easy, enjoyable life. That's how he lived. Nightclubs, beautiful girls attracted to his money, or rather his father's money. Fun friends and companions who loved living off others. Trey had a couple of run-ins with the police, and Mr. Bailey managed to get him out of trouble each time, but it cost him a lot of stress, effort and money. And then Danielle fell ill. Mr. Bailey suspected that nerves were to blame. She was distressed about her son. She dreamed that Trey would marry, become a model family man, and be his father's right hand. Her heart condition, which had been dormant since birth, became more acute and began to progress. Danielle knew about her condition, but it had never troubled her before. Now it started to worsen. Danielle weakened rapidly. She was constantly in hospitals and underwent several surgeries. During one of them, she did not survive. Her weakened body couldn't withstand another intervention. Mr. Bailey felt as if the ground had been knocked out from under his feet. All these years, he knew he had her, reliable, needing his protection and care, and at the same time giving him strength and motivation to conquer new heights. After his wife left him, Mr. Bailey felt utterly alone. Yes, he had a son, but Trey had grown up and become a stranger. Mr. Bailey didn't even know what to talk to him about, or how to support him in their grief. Trey was also shaken by his mother's death. Danielle was the most dear person to him. The young man looked lost. Mr. Bailey even felt sorry for him. For the first time, he saw his son so weak and unsure of himself. However, Trey quickly regained his composure and left for the capital. He found his hometown boring and cramped. The requests for money transfers continued, but now Trey addressed his father directly. Sometimes he didn't even thank him, thinking it was how things should be. Mr. Bailey transferred the sums his son requested, probably in memory of Danielle. As the years passed, nothing changed. Trey still lived his life in the capital. He became a father but did not live with the mother of his child and did not communicate at all. Trey was unemployed, so taking alimony from him was impossible. The woman didn't register Trey as the father, and Mr. Bailey, he wanted to see his grandson and participate in his life, but he didn't even know about his existence at first. He found out about the boy accidentally and had no idea where to look for him. Trey, of course, did not confess and answered all questions by saying it was his personal affair and his father shouldn't interfere. Then Mr. Bailey himself fell ill. The diagnosis was disappointing, but he fought and remained on his feet for a long time, despite much more pessimistic forecasts from doctors. Yet the disease took its toll and eventually laid him low. Trey periodically came from the capital to visit his father. Sheila saw him, handsome, dapper, stylish, and expensively dressed, strong-willed with a prominent chin, sharp cheekbones and bushy eyebrows. A typical soap opera heartthrob. No wonder he had plenty of girls. They always paid attention to him. During those visits, Sheila had noticed something, and it kept her on edge, and she needed to test her suspicions. During her time in that beautiful house, Mr. Bailey had become familiar to Sheila, but Trey's visits were harmful to Mr. Bailey's health and mood. Yes, the elderly man was already bedridden, but he remained cheerful, open to communication, and often met with friends. After Trey's visits, he was an entirely different person. Faded look, grey face, complete apathy. Some time would pass, and the old Mr. Bailey returned, until Trey appeared in his house again. A very strange pattern. Trey. There was something unpleasant about him. A haughty, contemptuous look. He looked through people, considering it beneath his dignity to greet them. A repulsive person, despite his very favourable appearance. Sheila was almost certain that Trey was poisoning his father. She had recently seen such a thing in a TV series where the heir poisoned a relative to inherit their fortune, and Trey, judging by his appearance and the stories of Mr. Bailey and his houseworkers, Trey seemed capable of such a thing. He seemed willing to do anything for money. So Sheila made up her mind. She bought an inexpensive camera, watched a few videos on how to install it, and left the camera in Mr. Bailey's bedroom. Sheila knew that soon his son would come, and she wanted to see for herself what was going on. If her suspicions were confirmed, if Trey was putting something in his father's water or food, she would go to the police. Finally the day came. Trey arrived at his father's house. He walked past Sheila without even a glance. She was used to such dismissive treatment. Soon her suspicions would either be confirmed or disproved. Anything was better than not knowing. Sheila went to the staff room, which was empty. She took out her phone and displayed the picture from Mr. Bailey's bedroom. The quality was excellent. She saw every detail and heard every sound. That was good. "How are you feeling?" Trey asked, sitting down at his father's bedside. "You're looking good." "I'm fine, Trey. How are you?" "Better than ever. Our case, how's it going?" "Father," Trey looked at him reproachfully, "you know it's useless." "But the detectives are still searching." "They are," Trey nodded. "You spend a lot of money on them, but even they think it's a waste of time and finances. That girl, your daughter, she probably didn't even exist. You made her up. Mr. Bailey shook his head and asked Trey to get a photograph of his daughter. Sheila understood nothing. Mr. Bailey had only a son, Trey. What daughter was he talking about? Trey obediently pulled an A4 photo from a folder and handed it to his father. She exists, Mr. Bailey said, looking fondly at the photo. She is my daughter. The child of the woman with whom you were cheating on my mother. She's dead. Maybe she was your daughter. Maybe not. Keep searching. You're insane. Trey looked at his father with anger and hatred. You won't accept the obvious. I know why you're so eager to find this mythical daughter, who either died as a child or never existed. You're just disappointed in me and hope she'll turn out to be better. Mr. Bailey turned grey and pale. His son's words caused him physical pain. Sheila realised Trey wasn't poisoning his father. He was killing him with words and bad news. Mr. Bailey was looking for his daughter. Trey seemed to be helping, but it wasn't really helping. Father and son talked more. Mr. Bailey promised to transfer a large sum of money to Trey, part for the detectives and part for Trey's efforts. The search for the missing daughter was now Trey's job, for which he received a salary. That's what Sheila understood from their conversation. Trey left. Only then did Sheila enter Mr. Bailey's room. He was either asleep or in a state of forgetfulness. As usual, after Trey's visit, his skin was grey, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Talking to Trey drained him. The guy didn't spare his father's feelings, and seemed to make it more painful. In Mr. Bailey's hands was the picture. Trey had left it or forgotten to take it. The picture was lying face down. Sheila couldn't resist her curiosity. She took it from the sleeping Mr. Bailey, and was amazed. In the picture, she saw a young woman, beautiful and smiling, holding a small child. It was Sheila's mother, and herself. The girl felt dizzy and her vision darkened. Sheila didn't dare speak to Mr. Bailey about it for a long time. At first, he felt bad and wasn't ready for such a shock. Then Sheila was simply afraid. Not only was the subject sensitive, but she would have to confess that she had been spying on Mr. Bailey and Trey, eavesdropping on their conversations, and seeing that photograph. She had pried into things that didn't seem to be her business at first. The fact that these affairs turned out to be Sheila's was revealed after her not-so-tactful intrusion. It was an accident. Mr. Bailey was about to be moved to a hospital for an annual full examination. He would be gone for at least a month, so Sheila couldn't postpone an important conversation any longer. Sheila entered the man's room, holding a picture. It had been in her and her mother's family photo album for many years. Sheila remembered the picture well from her childhood. It was fascinating to see her mother so young, and herself so tiny. Mr. Bailey, I need to have a serious talk with you. Look at this, Sheila said, handing the elderly man the picture. I know you have one just like it. It's strange and surprising. Please tell me where you got this photo. Mr. Bailey's expression changed. He looked carefully at Sheila's face, as if trying to read something from it. It can't be, but it was obvious from the beginning. Your looks, could it really be you? Explain it to me. I don't understand anything. Did you have a daughter? Where did you get this photo? I have the same picture. This picture was sent to me by the best woman in the world. She was probably the only one I ever really loved. It was a wonderful feeling. But we weren't meant to be together, as it turned out. This is Gina. I told you about her, remember? Gina. Sheila's mum. She was the very woman Mr. Bailey had once spoken of. He had met her at the factory and had seen her for several months. He finally lost his head over her. He had already made grandiose plans, knew it would not be easy, but was still going to part with Danielle and then propose to the one who made him so happy. but it wasn't meant to be. About a year and a half later, Trey had already been born. He became the centre of the universe for Danielle and for me too. Then this letter arrived with no return address. It contained a photograph, the one you're holding now. Gina and an adorable little girl. She wrote that she'd given birth to my daughter and wanted me to know. She wanted me to know that our love didn't dissolve into nothingness, that it had a continuation, a wonderful child. Gina also wrote that she was married and living in another city with her husband. She asked me not to look for her. The only thing she wanted was for me to know about you, about your existence. Mr. Bailey, of course, tried to find Gina, but she had really left town. Where and with whom she didn't tell anyone. She resigned from her job, took her daughter and left. Mum used to tell me she tried to build a family with one man, and they did leave for a few years. Then Mum broke up with him and we moved back, Sheila said. If I had known that, Mr. Bailey looked at Sheila attentively. If you are Gina's daughter, then she is gone. You told me about your life. I remember everything. Yes, my mum is gone. And I had so much to tell her. Mr. Bailey shook his head sadly, then continued to the story. I wanted to at least meet her before I died and give her support, do something for her. So I hired detectives. Trey did. I told him everything and put him in charge of the investigation. I couldn't do it on my own. I managed to find out something. Gina did have a daughter, but she was dead. I didn't believe it and the documents looked fake, but someone wanted to cover their tracks. I asked Trey to keep investigating, but it was fruitless. The bad news was getting to me lately. Time was slipping away and the chances of finding my daughter were getting slimmer. But fate took pity. You found me. And Trey, I don't think he was looking. He was just taking the money I gave him for the detectives. I'm not stupid. I know he's afraid of the inheritance. Afraid he'll have to share it with his sister. With you. I don't even know what to say. Sheila's eyes fluttered in confusion. Her mind was reeling from what she had just heard. But somewhere deep inside, she felt warmth. Warmth was spilling over her whole body. She had a father, and such a strong, kind, wise one at that. It's unbelievable. We have so much catching up to do while it's still possible. Mr. Bailey smiled warmly at Sheila. We'll do our best, and Trey, he'll even be pleased later, when he realizes everything. Can you imagine? Trey has dreamed of a sister all his life. A sister! When he was little, he asked us to give him a sister. But then he stopped, of course, as he got older. I think Trey will be happy. Mr. Bailey stretched out his hand and squeezed Sheila's palm firmly. The girl smiled. She suddenly felt wings grow behind her back. She was not alone now. She had a family.